All right, hello everyone. We're pleased to welcome you back to yet another BenQ AQColor webinar. My name is Richie, and with me are two familiar faces, Raph Nogal and Yadú Fereaud. Before we get started with this webinar on photography workflow, just a few quick announcements from BenQ. The PD3225U is now available for purchase. The Mindful Moments photography contest winners were recently announced on Instagram. Thank you to everyone who entered. There were some fantastic entries there. We currently have a promotional campaign going on currently, where if you leave a review on any BenQ monitor, you get a $20 Starbucks gift card. This is good through June. You can find this by going to the BenQ website, going to the monitor drop-down menu, and accessing the AQColor community page. So this webinar is going to break down the photography workflow from initial idea to client delivery. And without further ado, enjoy the video.
Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for another BenQ video. We're really excited to talk to you guys about a topic that maybe doesn't get discussed a lot, and that has to do with workflow. So talking about photo shoots sort of from beginning to end and what that process entails. And we'll discuss kind of the differences between how we do things between the two of us. Obviously, there's no one way to do things, but hopefully this will give you some ideas on how to approach your next photo shoot, and maybe you can follow sort of our process from beginning to end. So if you don't know who we are, my name is Raph Nogal, and I've been a wedding and portrait photographer for over the past 15 years. And with me I have
Yadú Fereaud, or Fereaud. I don't even know how to pronounce my own name. That's amazing. And I'm a fashion portrait photographer who has now kind of started into weddings. Once again, I began in weddings years ago, and now I'm going back into shooting weddings. And even for yourself, the majority of your time has been weddings, and now more corporate headshots.
Yeah, we're almost doing like a full switch here, swap. Yeah, so I'm focusing more on the corporate headshots, events, product photography as well, which I've been doing for years. So again, in terms of workflow, they have very different workflows that maybe we'll touch on later on today.
Yeah, and a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, like for myself, the way I differentiate a workflow is based on paid and non-paid. There's a lot of caveats that might be a crossover between them, but essentially when I think of a paid job, I think of deadlines, I think of a time frame that needs to be met for the results or for the delivery of the end result to go to the client. So the client is kind of like the number one thing in that scenario. When it is a non-paid, I call that a special project for myself. That could be a collaboration. It could be a barter where maybe products were exchanged, which is a form of payment. In that way, there could be deadlines in those. But a special project, I think, as a little more loose in terms of deadlines and calendar must be met by this specific day. There are also different types of photography, so.
Yeah, for sure. And so I also consider workflows, there's kind of two parts, sort of the client-focused workflow and then the technical focused workflow, right? So from the time that a client emails you to that first correspondence to working through your client throughout that whole process till delivery. And there's also the technical part, like how do you scope out locations, scouting, setting up your lights, what are you going to use in terms of equipment? Then what happens to those photos after the photos are taken? What does that process look like? Do you back things up, and where does it go from there? Does it go to post-production? Do you do your own post-production work? And then how is that delivered as well? So I kind of divide it into those two separate sections, I guess.
Yeah, so for you that is like the business aspect and then the actual photo shoot.
Yeah, and they mesh together, right? Because obviously as one is happening, the other one kind of kicks in as well. So as we're dealing with the client and getting to know what they want and how we can help them, we're also now thinking of the technical part, like what photographs, what's the aesthetic going to look like in those photographs, what equipment is going to be required to get that done, right? And then again, how we're going to deliver those types of deadlines and things like that.
The other thing, of course, is the timeline. So we were kind of discussing before this that weddings is probably the most drawn out. It's the longest period of time from beginning to actually handing in the album or whatever. That time frame of workflow is extensive compared to, for example, doing a model shoot or maybe a campaign where it's not as long.
Yeah.
So for myself, today, as an example, we have our model, who we'll introduce in a second, because I can't forget to have to do that. But one of the things there is the model contacting, saying, I'd like to do a photo shoot. Usually there's that moment of finding out what the inspo is. Based on the inspo, we choose the location, and we kind of match those things up. That's all done pre photo shoot. And here we are right now, already having done all of that legwork. So model, discussing what we're gonna do, wardrobe, the location. Now we're here, we've lit 2 different setups, because you're gonna be doing a setup over here. I'm gonna be taking advantage of this Valentine's background that Predoloft has put on. So these are the different things that we discuss before the photo shoot. Now we're in the photo shoot, and some of the logistics, some of the workflow for me happens to be lens selection.
Right.
I have to know where this is gonna end up. And if this is gonna end up, for example, on Instagram, I'm already thinking of that Instagram crop.
Right.
So I'm thinking of what lens am I gonna use, and what do I need to crop out of the image in order to get that frame that I'm looking for. That's a consideration that you wouldn't do if the end result is going to be in an album, or you are going to take advantage of 2:3 ratio. Is that something that for you is also a part of it? Like
Yeah,
the lens?
so again, going back to the wedding stuff, it's a lot more involved, right? Sometimes the client connection points are sometimes a year or 2, right, from the time they book you to the time you deliver. So we're not getting into wedding workflow today, because it is very extensive, and there's a lot of moving parts there. But very similar to what Yadú just said, if you're in a commercial shoot, or let's say corporate headshots, for example, they're very simple. Someone needs a new LinkedIn photo, you offer white backdrop, very simple type of headshots. They come to you, they do the shoot, you deliver the file, and that's the end of the story, right? But sometimes, just like Yadú said, we have to scope out. We have to get a sense of aesthetic, what's going to actually be in the photographs, especially in lifestyle type of photography that we may do for a client. So, I like to do lens selection, obviously, at the time of when I arrive to the location. Sometimes we don't know what we're dealing with, especially on a wedding scenario. But I kind of deal with that more on the fly, right? But I will obviously show up with a bag of 10 lenses where I'm not looking for a lens that I don't have when it comes to finding a specific focal length, for example. So it all plays together, for sure.
So let's begin. In this case, for this look, I've selected, I'm using, for example, the A7 Mark IV Sony camera, full frame, and I'm using the 55-1.8. So 55-1.8 is an older lens. If someone was looking at getting a 50, I would recommend the 1.4 G Master if you're doing photography. If you're going to do photography and video, then the 51.2 is definitely the one to get. That's the one that you have.
Yes.
So again, just to showcase the full range of Sony gear that we're going to be using, I'm also using one Profoto light, the B10, with a 3-foot modifier on there, the Magmod. So our model for today is Marina. And you can see her Instagram here, so you can definitely follow her on that. So thank you for being with us. And you can get placed right in front of this very nice Valentine's Day look. So my selection for this, again, I mentioned that Instagram might be an end result of where this series of photos is gonna go. So I have the 55 lens, and I'm acting like this is my 85. In this studio, this Predoloft, we're on the east side room, it's very big. So I could actually get away with using an 85mm lens and just be really, really far away in order to account for that extra crop that I would need for this ending up on Instagram, as an example. But in this case, I'm using the 55, and when I frame up the shot here, I am considering that extra headroom. So I am leaving a whole bunch of negative space because I'm already thinking of my workflow and how I'm going to have to crop this down in order to suit what Instagram will be. Right now, that light is off, meaning I don't have the mulling lamp on. And what you're seeing is the light that's coming from these massive windows. So as we've discussed in previous videos, I like to do a blend. I like to utilize this light. So I'm not starting from a place of complete darkness. I am utilizing that window light to illuminate her, and I'm going to use that Profoto light at a very low power. I want to say 2 or 3 that it should be set to. And that is going to give me just a little accent, a little more light that's going to be hitting her face. So as we've always done, turn off the flash to begin with, and I just take a picture of the ambient. Okay. If I cycle through, once again, here, this is showing me that I'm not clipping anything, meaning there's nothing flashing back at me saying that I've overexposed or underexposed. So according to the camera, this is a correct exposure. And now I'm going to add the light. I give it a second to make a connection. And then once again, I'm doing a test shot. Let's bring this down. And then if you come over here, you can kind of see the difference here. That was natural light, and this is with the flash, okay? And again, am I happy with this? This is all just testing out the lighting. Okay, I like this. Now we can continue and we can start doing some photos. So right now, I also indicate to the model that I am shooting full body, just so she knows that her feet, positioning of her feet matter. And then some 3/4 length, again accounting for that headroom. And then some portraits.
Yadú, what would be your workflow following immediately the photo shoot? What takes place right after?
So for me, I like to be as proficient because the photo shoot is fresh in my mind. So I'm going to go home, I'm going to upload all the photos to my computer, and then immediately I want to see kind of what came out of this photo shoot, you know? Mm-hmm. I do like to take a lot in bursts, even though right now I didn't really do that, but I don't know if that one photo shoot where she was blinking is the one where everything came together perfectly, right? So I do shoot more just to account for those things, but I still want to go through and make my selection. So for me, I go home, I put it on my computer, and immediately I try to do the selection process, or what you'd call the culling of the images. So I want to go through them all, select all the ones, or in that time, I could also remove the ones that maybe she was blinking or the flash didn't fire, whatever the case
So there's
may
two
be.
ways of calling. You can either call in or call out, right?
Exactly.
So there's,
I do both at the same time.
Right.
I basically call, and if I see my favorite, I will highlight it as my favorite. If I see one that needs to go, it needs to go.
Do you keep all the files, or do you ever delete files from your shoot?
So I keep all the raw files. When I make my selections, I'm usually using the JPEGs, which is, again, a good call out. Part of my workflow is that I do shoot JPEG and RAW. Now, having said that, when I've made my selection and I've deleted all the ones that I don't like, from whatever's left over on the JPEGs, I will then send the model through Dropbox or maybe a USB so that she can make her selects, right? And then she can decide, oh, I like it, or I don't like it, whatever the case may be.
So I want to touch on the one point about keeping raw files, and I do the same thing, and I'll tell you, over the 15 years, I have had times where I had to go back to a shoot, and you know, it could be a month later, even when, let's say, on a wedding, okay, used to do a lot of weddings, so let's say there's a group shot of 20 people, and you get that one where 19 of them are not blinking, but the one is, and then the other file that you maybe rejected because 3 people were blinking, the one person that you need with their eyes open is actually not blinking. So you actually have to crop their head out and put it onto the one photo to get that one photo with everybody looking at the camera and not blinking. So if you went ahead, called all your photos, and then deleted the files you didn't want, you wouldn't have that opportunity to go back and deliver that one beautiful family photo of 20 people. So just something to keep in mind.
One of the other things on culling, there are certain organizations that do not want you to delete even the ones where they blink or whatever else may be a decision for you. If you've taken 2,000 images, they want 1 through 2,000.
And you're talking about photo studios that hire photographers
Yes.
to shoot their events, right?
So you should also have that as am I sending you my selection or am I sending you everything?
Yeah.
There are some clients that will say, I want all the images. They are typically meaning I want all the good images.
Yeah.
They also don't really want to go through 2,000 images. They want to go through maybe 700 of your best.
Yeah, and you know what? And that's part of our job as professionals. This is what we do for work. We're professional photographers. So for us, it's part of our job to be to guide our clients, right? Clients sometimes don't know what they want. They don't really know what they're looking for. They want all the photos because they think every single photo is this amazing photo. There are photos where you're blinking or scratching yourself or doing something where you may not want those photos. And so it's our job to really present them with the best of our work as well, and that's ultimately what they're hiring us for. So, and also to the point of keeping raw files, guys, memory is so cheap these days. Hard drives, you know, most of our cameras that we're using have dual card slots where we shoot simultaneously on both cards in case one fails. You never know. And again, as a professional, that's something that we need to really be mindful of because sometimes there's no going back. You know, again, going back to weddings, what I've experienced with a lot is, you know, there's only one first kiss on you know, at the altar. So you can't risk that for sure.
What about in terms of storage and backups? Do you carry like a hard drive with all of your backups and then you put it in another place, or do you have just everything on one computer?
Yeah, so in terms of backups, there's obviously a bunch of different ways of doing this. The way I do things, again, I shoot dual card slots simultaneously. So I have two card slots shooting together. And then I have a double hard drive, so a RAID 0, I believe that they're called, where it does redundancy as a backup. And then I actually have a third copy of that I take off-site as well. So if my studio gets broken into, a fire, anything else, after any new shoot, I update that third hard drive, and that goes off-site as well. There is another option to have cloud backups as well, which take, I think, forever. And I used to try to do that. It didn't work quite well for me because of the amount of files that I had. But maybe if you have smaller shoots, you're not doing weddings and smaller catalogs to deal with, it may be a very good option as well. But again, I always want to have those backups. So again, that's part of my workflow, right? In terms of, you know, yes, the shoot happens, and then what happens after that in terms of the actual files themselves.
So for myself, I do have dual backups. The third one is cloud-based, and that's simply because I am probably sending to Dropbox or to some other location, and so that's like a third spot for where those can be. But I always take in mind that that backup is last resort because they're just JPEGs. They're not RAW. Right. So for me, a backup is a RAW backup, whether I have a hard drive that has that, and that's, I call it the backup because for me, I'll have a hard drive that's usually a solid state drive that's my working drive. So the one that I'll edit from and is much more responsive, much quicker, that's usually a solid state drive hard drive, and that's where I'm working from. But then I'll have like one of those older hard drives that's like, you know, 16 gigabytes that will hold everything as a backup. So that's the secondary. And then the third is JPEGs online in the cloud.
Yeah, awesome.
So let's start on your setup.
Yeah.
I know you wanted to move this
Perfect.
couch. So
yeah, let's do that. Let's move some furniture. In my mind, I'm thinking that this would be more of a lifestyle shoot, okay? So we can pretend that we had this whole thing planned. Let's pretend a client has contacted me about, let's say they're you know, an influencer maybe they are, they've collaborated with a clothing company, let's say, and they need some images for their use, okay? So, or maybe it's a website that's, you know, let's say it's a fashion designer and they need some photos of their clothes on people for their website, let's say. So those are conversations we would have with our client prior to photographing because again, just like Yadú did with Instagram, we know that there's a certain orientation that we need to keep in mind. So for me, let's say there needs to be some space on either side, left or right of our subject, so that way they can put menus, or maybe it'd be for a title page, I guess, on the website. So we need to keep those things in mind. Okay, so once that's kind of done, we've obviously discussed price and what the shoot entails, how long it's going to be, what's kind of involved. And then we're going to obviously arrive at the studio. So we pre-plan this by perhaps looking for images of the studio space online, or we can do a site visit and see what things look like. okay? So once we get a sense of our space, we're going to get a sense of what the clothing looks like, and then decide on what that aesthetic is going to entail, right? So again, with Marina's outfit, it's more of a business vibe, I guess. It's got less party gown, I guess, like Yadú was photographing. So we wanted to kind of have it a bit more formal, a bit more modern. So we have sort of a solid background with some details, a pretty modern couch, and some plants in the background. So more of a lifestyle image, okay? And that's what we're going to deliver to our clients. So initially, when I enter a location, and you might have heard me say this before in other videos too, I just like to look at what the light is doing in the space. And we can see we have beautiful windows there and a lot of daylight coming in. We have a very overcast days. We have some shears as well that we can use to soften that if it was quite hard, but it is pretty soft light. So I'm looking at my hand and I know that light is coming from this direction. And I can see directly on her face there that there's a shadow side here and the light side. So we can kind of play with that at least as our initial setup. So let's try to get at least dialed in. For those wondering, I'm using a Sony Alpha 1 and I'm shooting with a 50-1.2. The reason why I chose a 50-1.2 because from this distance, I don't have too much space behind me, but from this distance, I can do full body here, okay? And if I wanted to zoom in, I can technically walk here and do a 3/4. Okay, so that's kind of more of those lifestyle type of images. We're not shooting a headshot, we're shooting more of the body in this case in an environment. So let's take a quick test shot here. I can see my exposure, and I'm going to just take one quick shot here. I'm at 1/800th of a second, f1.2, because I really want to fade out those plants in that background. They are relatively close to my subject, so I'm trying to get that aperture ring all the way open so I can get those nice and blurry in the background as much as possible. And when I'm looking at the shot, it looks pretty good. It's very dramatic. There's a lot of light and shadow happening. And when I'm looking at her face, there is a little too much shadow. So it's very dramatic. I like those types of images. And I think if she was to look almost completely out the window, it would work quite well. But it's a little too much. So what I'm going to do is involve another light here. Probably the most basic off-camera flash setup you can get, a nice shoot-through umbrella. This is a small one. I don't need anything blowing the entire scene out or having light spill everywhere. I don't technically need that. I just need a little bit more light directly on her face, just to kind of, more of that helping light. Okay, so let's turn that on. Now with umbrellas, again, if you have them further back, they need more power. They'll influence the background a little bit more. If you move this umbrella, I call them light grenades, okay, they just go everywhere. But if they're close to your subject, they don't need as much power, so they're not going to spill all over that background, right? So we're going to keep it in this nice, it's about 6 feet or so away from her, and that's just I think that's a good place to start. And I'm going to take the center of that umbrella just past her shoulder there, so I get more of a feathering effect, so it fills in more of that shadow side, okay? So we're going to start with TTL, which is through the lens metering. It lets the camera and the light work things out among themselves and tell me what I think the right exposure is. And let's see how that does. I'm going to go 3/4 for now, just to get a sense of where that light's going to fall. Okay, let's do one more. Perfect. So TTL wants to really add a lot of light in there, and almost to the point where it's overpowering the ambient light that's coming in. So I'm going to take that down a little bit. I can do that from my camera, or I can walk up to it. I'm going to take it down 2 stops, and we're going to do one more here. That's it, perfect. Great. And that's a little bit better. So it's not overpowering, but it's still filling that shadow side, which is quite nice. So I like this, but again, if we're doing more of a lifestyle shoot, maybe we want to make it a little bit more commercial. Okay, maybe we want a little bit more hair light, maybe a little bit of separation from that background a little bit. So we can involve the second light. Maybe, Yadú, you can help me out since you're right there. Mm-hmm. I'm going to turn it on and turn on the modeling light so I can see where it's going. Raise it up for me a little bit. And all I really want to do is have some light. She's a brunette, right? So we want to just make sure there's some detail in that hair. So if you can see now where that, as you can see my shadow here, as I put my hand there, you can see that we got a little bit more life in the hair, right? Which is quite nice. So let's play with that and see what that looks like. Yeah, and that's perfect. So that looks really nice. It balances everything out. Let's do a couple of different versions. Now, I mentioned websites, so I definitely want to make sure that we have a little bit of space as I'm forming this, as I'm framing this up. We want to make sure. Bend your elbow for me a little bit. Yeah, just it. Perfect. That's it. Good. Twist yourself a little bit towards me. That's it. Yeah, you got it. Perfect. Awesome. Beautiful.
And I noticed that you go from vertical to horizontal. Again, is that part of the workflow of, okay, this end result is going to be for a website, so maybe you want landing page, maybe
Yes,
you want
exactly.
some verticals.
Yeah, and obviously variety is key. This is something that we would discuss with the client. If our job here is to deliver one photo, or a photo for one particular use, there's no point in wasting that time. But I think it's nice too. It gives you an opportunity to sell perhaps to your client later for maybe images relating to the website landing page where they might want to use on social media and other platforms as well. So it's always nice. The reason why I started with vertical is just I wanted to see how that shadow is going to fall on her face a little bit closer up, and then I moved into the final position for, let's say, the website landing page, right? So I don't think I'm going to shoot any more than that. I think I got the images that I'm looking for. And again, if this was a real shoot, for a real client, we would obviously have likely, someone involved in marketing from that department, from that company, or the client and I would get together, load up our images on our laptop and on our BenQ monitor, and go through the images, make sure that we're hitting those targets that they want, right? So after this, our workflow would basically, we would say goodbye to our client, we would go home, we would back things up that we discussed. I would be calling as well. I'd like to do my own calling. I know there's other platforms out there and companies that do calling, and there are some benefits to those for sure. Sometimes I feel because they weren't there, they don't know what the client perhaps maybe reacted to during the shoot that might be one of their favorites, while AI or another person may dismiss that images because they may think there are other better ones based on certain criteria.
Well, you mentioned something really good, and it's, for example, she may have only wanted a headshot, right? However, I really like the shoes that she has.
Right.
So part of that vertical horizontal, using the 50 to move back to get full body, even though the client maybe said, this is what I want, but you showing them an option of a full body shot and then they fall in love with that, I mean, you shot it, so it's something that you can offer as something extra.
Yeah, and a really good way to do that is to make sure that you hit your target first. So let's say you have an hour shoot, spend the first bit of your time making sure that you do get that one shot or the shot that that your client needs, and then play, have fun, do other things. You may show the client things that they may not know that they even want, which is how it's really awesome when that happens. So.
Okay. So let's finish up this side of it. We're going to take an intermission, and then we will start on the actual at home, at office for you part of the workflow. All right, thank you. All right, well, welcome to this second half of the video. And this is more of in-office logistics and actual workflow when it comes to editing.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are, we have either at home or a studio that we are, taking our images to. Obviously, some of us may work for bigger, studios where there's, I guess, a bunch of desks and everybody's got their station. But I think for most of us, I would say, we are, we're taking this to a place where we frequent, like our home or our studio.
So I personally like the editing process. For this reason, I really, really, really pay attention to the monitor that I have, because that's the interaction that I have with the images. I want to see the color detail. I want to see the finite detail. When I'm working, for example, on a face, I'll enlarge the face on the screen and just see the eye fully on the screen to see all of those details and to work at that level. So for me, the monitor part is very important. And as I mentioned in other videos, but I'll mention it again, prior to going with BenQ, I was using TV, literally a 40-inch television that was 4K. And for me, that was great because of its size. whether I was getting color accuracy or anything like that, it was more just the size of the actual screen that mattered to me. I don't know for you, do you have just the one monitor? Do you have multiple
Yeah,
monitors?
I have one monitor. I have a BenQ monitor that I use to edit on, and I have a secondary monitor to open emails and other things. So it doesn't need to be as color accurate as my primary editing monitor. And you know, the first thing I guess that we all need to do when we're talking about editing monitors is calibration. So these monitors can be calibrated to a lot of detail in terms of color accuracy. They display different color profiles as well. So something like a DataColor Spider X2, for example, is a calibrator that you could use. There's other brands out there as well. And that's the number one step, because it allows your images to kind of come out of the gates the best that they possibly can, because we have no control whether our clients are viewing these images on a calibrated monitor. We don't know whether this image, if it ends up on the website, whether someone, you know, could be using their work monitor at their work, which has never been calibrated, and it's not, you know, nowhere close to the quality of a BenQ, for example. But at least this gives your images a chance to come out of the gates as best as they can be in terms of color representation.
I think one of the biggest things and the reasons why a calibration needs to be done is that the monitor never knew what room you were going to put it in. It doesn't know the lighting conditions of the room that you're going to put it in. And what a calibration system is actually doing is it's judging the ambient light of the room. So typically you would do two calibrations, one during the day with whatever available light is coming in, and then one at night, so that your computer, using this little puck, you can actually go through and select the different calibrations depending on where you are the day. Do you have lights on in the room when you edit? Do you turn everything off? Do you close your windows? Are you in a completely dark room atmosphere? That's all part of it.
And that affects your images quite a lot, actually. Maybe without really being so obvious, but you know, if you have you know, incandescent light bulbs everywhere, and you're looking at your images, you know, for hours at a time, and then you suddenly turn those off and you look at the same image. Let's say you walk out of the room, turn the lights off, walk back in, and look at the same image. You might see colors that you're like, oh my gosh, this is completely, you know, too warm or too cold in terms of color. So it definitely plays a role in that color accuracy.
So for me, one of the other things is anti-glare. I know that that's really important for you as well.
Yeah, 100%. Anti-glare is awesome. So there's two things for me that are really critical for my space, because I do have a large window coming in from the side. So having this screen protector, or what is the actual? The hood, yeah.
I call it a lens hood.
The hood, yeah, almost a lens hood for your monitor. It's huge because when, you know, basically it cuts off a lot of the side light that would otherwise spill on my monitor. So that is really, really good. I don't have any direct sun coming in. I don't have like, the sun doesn't set or rise in that area and go through the window. It's always diffused light, like kind of here. But it obviously does affect you know, where that light spills on the monitor. So this hood is extremely important in my environment.
So, by the way, this is my simulation of light. In my office, there is window light directly behind me, meaning that there is a direct light going towards the screen. And so that glare, I don't know if the monitor it's not supposed to, but you'll see that it's dissipating that light, which could be a real big distraction on the screen. And so again, nothing as direct as this is hitting my screen, but as an illustration, you can kind of see how it dissipates the light. And because of that matte finish, it doesn't bother me as much, and I can continue working even in those conditions.
And I remember prior to getting a dedicated monitor for editing, I would use, let's say, an iMac, right? As much as I love the computer, they had a gloss screen, which was terrible because anytime you had anything in the background or that sun, it didn't have the hood either. So anytime any kind of sun or any reflections, let's say you had something in the back, you know, a little decorative thing that shines or whatever, it would just be like you would literally see a mirror reflection of it in your monitor, and now you're trying to edit over top of that, and that ends up being a disaster.
Yeah, so for me, that anti-glare, the color accuracy, the calibration, even this hood, it all adds to my experience when editing photos. So I'll put up all the images on my computer, I'll go through the culling process, again, using the monitor, but it's really that editing process that I enjoy. And so I was kind of looking for what is the best reproduction of color. And for me, I think it's the end result. I want the image that I edit here to match either the cell phone or the iPad or the print of how it's going to end up. And I think that there was too much differences of me spending so much time editing an image, getting that perfect color red, and then putting it on a website, and then it looks completely different.
Yeah.
So that was a big frustration for me, and the reason why this became such a good tool.
Yeah, it's frustrating when you work on an image, you put it out to the world, and you look at it on 2 or 3 other devices, and they both look, let's say, too red or too magenta. Then you know that those 3 are closer in accuracy than the one you have, because those 3 match and they're completely different devices, while yours is the only one that doesn't match. And again, that's how it's coming out of the gate, right? So that's definitely important to make sure we have that, dialed in.
So now that I'm finished the editing process, again, I don't know how you edit, but for myself, I use Lightroom. Lightroom is, for me, what takes care of color, skin, brightness, if anything, but normally that doesn't really play into it. I usually try to take care of as much of that in Lightroom as possible. Photoshop for me, which would be the second segment, is really just finishing touches. If I need to do some major, what I call major surgery to anybody, whether they've asked to look slimmer or things like that, that's where I would make those adjustments in Photoshop. And then from there, it gets exported. Is that similar to yours?
Yeah, so I use Lightroom primarily because of the large number of files that I deal with. I have also used, and sometimes do use, Capture One, which is, again, we don't want to have the whole Nikon versus Canon debate. This is just Lightroom versus Capture One. Whichever software works best for you and gives you the results that you want is the one you should use. Both are really extremely good systems, or programs rather, for editing, and just stick to the one that works. But yeah, Lightroom is just my choice. And again, Photoshop, all depends, because sometimes, I do a lot of product photography as well. Product color accuracy is extremely important, because if that product has a specific shade of teal, that needs to be represented in your photograph. So there's obviously different tools, there's different little color checkers that you can photograph, create a color profile to match those, and it gets a little bit complicated, I guess, sometimes, but color accuracy is extremely important with product. And then obviously you can take that into different softwares that can edit for you. And then it all depends if it's going to be in print as well. And then you mentioned print before, and earlier on in my career, I would, the frustration was always there, where you would get a file out to a printer, and it would come back super dark, or just the colors were completely off. And it's not that the printer's stuff is printing it wrong, it's that the color on the monitor and the color that's actually embedded in the file are different. And that's your first sign that you know that you need to calibrate your monitor, or get a monitor that will have the ability to display all those colors for you.
And some print shops, you do have to say that it's already been edited, and that it doesn't require, because in some cases, the print shops, they almost have like an automated, that it sees an image and it does like an auto adjustment.
Yes.
So all the adjustments that you've invested time doing suddenly get canceled because they put it in auto mode. It's almost like they put a filter on it.
Yeah, I work with a professional lab, local lab here, GTA Imaging, and they do have the ability to color correct the files that you sent if they think it's off. And actually, they're so great that, if you find a really good lab to work with, if you do print a lot, that if something is off when they're printing, they will stop production and call you and say, hey, we've noticed that the colors are super weird, and this, is that intentional, or is that something that you need to rework? And having that relationship with a really nice local lab is always great as well.
Mm-hmm. So once that's done, then yes, that's usually the last step, where now it needs to go to the client. Whether it be, in your case, weddings, where there's albums and everything, right. That's where you might be putting on business hat, as well as delivering the actual photographs in whatever means that they're going to go. For myself, it's usually either sending the files high resolution to the client, or if it's going to be something where I can just throw it on a USB stick and hand it off. Again, it depends on the situation there. That's usually within the time frame of photo shoot, a couple days later, delivery. I know that when it comes to weddings, because you're doing so many, that time frame could be anywhere from a month to 2 months. I know a lot of wedding studios where they'll tell the client, you'll get your photos after a month, or you'll get your photos after 2 months, depending. So that has to be part of it as well, that it's normal that there are those waiting periods. When I started, I just always assumed that it's immediate.
Right.
You do the photo shoot, tonight I do the culling, tomorrow I do the editing, and the next day they've got it. So I began that practice. So I have a lot of clients that are surprised at how fast the turnover.
And that's a good thing, because you want to under promise, over deliver. That is, that's something you want to kind of save yourself in a sense, where if you tell somebody 2 months and you know you can easily do it in a month. What if something comes up? We have a great opportunity to do another project within that time frame. You do have that backup now. You do have that extra month, let's say. But if you can promise 2 months and deliver in a month, your client will be happy. Everything's going to be looking really good for sure. So I think that's where those two workflows that I mentioned, the business workflow and the technical workflow always mesh together, and they are always working in conjunction with each other, where the communication comes into play, and then also how we're handling that file, what monitor are we using to make sure our colors are correct. All those types of things mesh together eventually throughout that whole process, for sure.
And in this, we really didn't go through much of the details of the monitor, because again, for me, the relevance is the end result.
Right.
The very first one that I got from BenQ, I was able just to fall in love with the monitor and say, this is it. So I didn't actually go through all the technical, it gives you this type of color accuracy or this. It was a visual, I had to learn that way. It had to look good to my sight. And once I was on board, I was like, okay, this is it.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. I've never been a photographer that, obviously I know what the inverse square law is, but I don't need to go at a measuring tape and then adjust, or use a light meter very much unless I'm doing product photography. But I'm not very technical in the sense where I'm not about the numbers and all that. So same with this, it's not to me about whether it's 100%, Adobe RGB or 99%. I think both are great, and as long as I can see the results, I think it's awesome. And you can definitely, in this case, you can.
And later we should come out with a video talking with our videographer, who by the way is Luis, because his experience with BenQ is, it takes it to another level. Now you're using a monitor to help you with video,
right,
which is again a completely different thing, using Rec 709, their color space, compared to what we're using for photography. Right. So again, my experience with BenQ is amazing because color accuracy, because of the matte finish, because of the hood. It's the right tool for what I do, and because I enjoy the editing process so much, I enjoy using the monitor so much.
Yeah, for sure. And even if you do send out your files to an editing company, it's always nice to kind of see what they're supposed to look like once they get delivered back to you, and before you send it off to your client as well. So I think it's an extremely important part. I didn't really realize the importance of it until a little maybe later than I probably would have liked, and that was because of frustrations with printing and things like that. So if you can get on top of that earlier in your photography journey, I think you'll be happier as a result, for sure.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for lending us your ear for this presentation on workflow. Again, even this segment, even saying workflow, it could be so much. We can have like a complete video on just wedding, on just logistics, like the business side of it. So workflow is very much a loose term that can describe many different scenarios. In this one, we kind of went very quickly over from initial idea all the way through to the editing process and delivering to the client what the end result will be. Right. And even talking about the monitor as just being a segment in that entire process. Yeah. It's very important. I think that every caveat, every area is important, but again, to have that tool available is incredible.
Yeah, it's part of the process, right?
Exactly. So yes, thank you very much for seeing this video, and we will see you next time.
All right, thank you, Raph and Yadú, for that just amazing video on the workflow. You guys broke down so much on it. I liked how you pointed out it's important to keep in mind the platforms that those are going to be posted on, and to leave headroom, negative space, etc., based on the expected end results. We have a couple questions. One from Mary. What monitor calibration settings do you recommend for editing photos for print? I'm thinking luminance, white point, gamma, and black point.
Yeah, so Mary, those are all very important aspects. I think it depends on a couple of things. You gotta first, I would get in touch with the lab that you're actually working with and see what recommendations they have specifically. They may be using specific equipment that where you need to apply specific settings to get the best results there. When we're using calibration software, like for example, this guy here, Spider. Data color. There's other ones. Why is the name escape me now? There's other ones on the market as well. What's that?
IFS?
Maybe. Other calibration software and hardware in conjunction. Obviously, they work together, and they take you step by step and take you through that process, selecting the white points, the black points, and all that kind of stuff. So it goes into quite a lot of detail, and so every calibrator is going to have that information for you to pick. I don't have an exact number of what the gamma should be top of my head right now, but as you're doing that process through your monitor, working with your lab, I think you're going to achieve the best results in that way. And I know it's a bit of a general answer here. I don't know if that helps you in any way, but that's where I would get started, first contacting the actual printer that you're working with and see what recommendations they have and kind of going from there, at least as a starting point.
Yeah, and going on what you just said, each lab, because of the machine that they're using, the type of printer that they're using, if they're using a printer and you've set it to a very specific color that you want it replicated and they can't produce it, that's where the problem would become a bigger issue, just because the way that they're printing, maybe that tone of red cannot be reproduced for their printer, but another printer style can.
And that also too, where color profiles come into play too. Some labs prefer, a 16-bit file, like a TIFF file or a different, maybe ProPhoto profile versus an sRGB, which is 8-bit, let's say. A lot more color information and things like that. So again, just working with that lab, they'll tell you exactly, at least give you a starting point where to start and what kind of files they're looking for to get the best results there.
All right. Michael asks, you didn't hear anything about culling software and how you approach file management.
Culling software?
DAM software.
So, sorry, I can't catch that.
Yeah, culling software and how you approach file management. And you mentioned DAM software.
Yeah, we talked about culling briefly in the video, just how we do it, whether we call in, call out, or both. Culling software. So I used to use Photo Mechanic, which is a very quick. You get a JPEG preview of the files that you're working with the raw files that you're working with. It's a very quick way of getting through a lot of things, quickly. I call sometimes in Lightroom, so it's just that's where the bulk of my editing and processing takes place. So sometimes that's where culling takes place as well. It is a little bit on the slower side because it does have a lot of way of doing it. And obviously there's a lot of AI culling software available that you can look into. I'm trying to think of names. Maybe when you talk, I'll try to remember them. But the problem with culling, again, it can be helpful because it will automatically maybe deselect or call out images that are out of focus, and so on. The problem is that, you know, whether that out of focus was intentional, whether the action that's photographed perhaps is more important than it being just slightly out of focus. And then when you use the automatic AI software, it may call things for you that you may not agree with. I find with wedding photography, when we're there during the day with our clients, and there's emotion that plays a role in these images, and whether, you know, we take a photo of something where the AI doesn't really seem that, you know, doesn't think it's important, or maybe you set a certain number of parameters there, so it calls it out, and it wasn't, you know, the software wasn't there with us. It's not a living being, so there's no emotional attachment to anything either, right? From the file, from the client perspective. So if a moment was very important to our client in the moment as we were photographing it, we know to you know what to do with those files, but the AI system may not. So there's some pros and cons with that.
And for myself, I used to use a program called Browse, that's very similar, where the previews get generated very quickly. So bringing all the information into that, it was just a faster way of doing that. But I, in the end, started using Lightroom as well. And even though it's a slower process, the fact that from my camera, I can already put my favorites and it will recognize that in Lightroom. So at least one part of the culling process is kind of done by me from my camera. And then when I've uploaded everything, the deselection or the deleting of images that I don't like, that is usually done on Lightroom as well.
So, as I mentioned this, when you're talking, I'm going to remember the names. One AI calling and editing software that I have used is called Aftershoot. So you can look into that. And also Imagen or Imagine, one of the two ways of pronouncing it. That's another one that does calling and editing as well. So if you have, you know, something you might want to give a try in terms of culling specifically.
Okay. So you guys talked about keeping all of the RAWs from these shoots. What do you think is the best way to keep these organized? And how long do you keep these RAWs saved before deleting them?
Want to go first?
So far, years. Yeah, I think I have about 5 to 10 years worth of, and again, it depends. If it's a campaign and it's now done, then maybe it wouldn't last 2 years before. There are cases where a company organization will ask for images that you took 2 years ago because they need it for a flyer or something. But I think that wedding is more what I would hold on to if I can forever and ever and ever. Just because, again, that's a little more sacred or important information. And so I do have hard drives that once it kind of goes through the year, I don't keep it on my work hard drive. It will be on the backup hard drive. And then that can just get stored. So yeah.
Yeah, weddings are one thing that I constantly get a request from past clients, and maybe 10 years plus, is to have certain photos of someone that has recently passed away.
Yeah.
So that's one of the ones that we actually do get, you know, quite a bit of kind of, hey, you know, that photo you took of my dad, you know, we'd love to have a photo of that. You know, I can't seem to find it, or I don't have a copy or whatever. So yeah, so we keep it. I like to tell my clients that, look, at the end of the day, you're responsible for, as technology changes and our media changes, right? We've gone from, you know, floppy disks to CD-ROM drives to USB to the cloud, and who knows what's next. So that's their responsibility to update that. But myself, I always have two copies on a working drive, which then get backed up to a secondary drive, which also gets backed up again. So I technically have 2 copies plus a third copy of every year that I've been in business. So that's it's a lot of hard drives, and they sit there. And I'll be honest, I have gone back. I've done, I've done about 15 years of doing live theater photography, actually. And it's something that I'm like, you know what, I'm actually going to end up putting that on my website. And I'm trying to look back to 15 years of work that, that I perhaps would like to show. There's some shows that I photographed that are very stunning visually that I'm like, oh, I would love to have that in my portfolio. There's still really decent shots. And so, yeah, it's kind of great to have the ability to go back that far and be able to still use some of these images. So yeah, definitely multiple copies of each, and try to run them once in a while just to make sure they can still get up and running. So hopefully that helps.
And the other thing that I've noticed is over the years, I've been better at how to catalog and number and date everything. Because there are times where even myself, I want to remember a campaign that I did that was years ago. And it's how do you find it through keywords, not really knowing the month you did it or that kind of thing. Yeah. And I remember at the beginning, I would catalog things just by the numerical date, but there was no other information to try to kind of, revive that information unless you knew the model you shot with, the location, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So over time, I have, I guess, developed my own system as to how I can easily access a photo that I might have taken 4 years ago.
Awesome. All right. So question from Joseph said differences in color from post to publish has been really frustrating. So he's planning on buying a BenQ in the near future, the SW272U. He's asking, is a spider really a necessity he should get at the same time, or decide if it's necessary later?
So the type of calibration that you use, I mean, spider is the one that we've got here, but I think that I actually had an older version of this. And when you open up, to do the calibration, it does have a list of different calibrators that you could, potentially use. Mm-hmm. So I remember that when I did it the first time, I'm really just using that monitor and I'm actually checking it to either the laptop screen, and I do the calibration on both so that I can move a picture from one screen to the other to then notice the differences. Because just before the calibration happens, if you're working on an image and then you slide it to another monitor and suddenly all the colors are different and all of them change, that's when, that frustration kicks in, because you're like, oh, I've been working on this for so long to get the color right, but now on a different monitor or on a screen or on my iPhone, it now doesn't seem to be the same colors. So for me, the calibration process did help a lot. And depending on the type of calibrator that you get, whether it be the Spider or another brand.
There's X-Rite as well, right? The X-Rite.
Whichever one you get, it's just getting you a little bit closer to that accuracy and that relief of that frustration.
Yeah, and one of the first tests you can do is just kind of see what the internal calibration. Every monitor's got, I think, an internal calibrator of some kind. I know some of the BenQ monitors have that. So could use what's currently there and see how that performs. And the best test you can do is actually print a photograph. Maybe have one where you have multiple colors, or do multiple prints to your lab. Spend $20 or $10, whatever it is, just to get something back from them, and you can sit there and compare it to your screen and see how far you're off. And if you're pretty close, then maybe the calibration is good enough. If it's completely off, then that you will need something a little bit more advanced to get those colors working. And again, as I mentioned before, contacting that lab that you're currently using or that you plan on using and getting some feedback from them, because they're in that industry. They know exactly what machines they're using, and perhaps can give you some guidance on what works best. Maybe there's certain calibrators that work really well with. They've had really good success with other clients as well that may be able to suggest something for you. But at least start by printing something, getting that back, and saying how close you are right from the get-go once you get that new monitor.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for your insight on that, guys. My question is, how do you guys keep track of your workflow? Is there any organizational tools or tips you could recommend?
Yeah, so One of the best ways for me to keep everything on track is using a CRM, a client relation system. And Sprout Studio is what I use, and that's kind of, it's more of the business workflow where you can literally customize it to by assigning workflows within that system. So let's say a client emails you about an inquiry about headshots. Well, you can have a pre-populated email that you've already written. You can make changes to that email, obviously, before you send it out, so you don't sound like a robot. But 90% of that work is done, because every time you get an inquiry, you're writing the same email every single day, multiple times a day, as soon as those inquiries come in. So you can apply different workflows, and then, you know, the system lets you, let's say, like, okay, 2 days before the shoot, send a reminder, send your studio address, and remind them that there's an invoice that needs to be paid, and all that kind of stuff. So that's one great way for me to get organized in terms of the business side of things. So Sprout Studio, there's other softwares that are available that provide this kind of service. But I love Sprout, so that's what I use. And in terms of technical workflow, I think that just kind of over time, different projects will have different needs as well, right? So if we're doing a commercial project with something specific in mind, so you know, we will have a different workflow that will kind of apply to that, pre-planning, getting the gear, and so on. So it's kind of hard to answer. There's not really like a checklist that I do that I repeat for every single shoot, because I shoot a lot of different things. So I can't apply a wedding workflow to, you know, a commercial shoot. It doesn't really work. So part of that, I think, is just experience too. I mean, we've made the mistakes along the way, you know, with 15 years of doing photography. So we kind of learned as well. Oh, we got a thumbs up from, did you guys see that?
Woo.
I don't know what's happening. Fireworks. Wow, that's crazy. I mean, I guess it was a really great answer that I gave. So yeah. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, check out Sprout Studio. Really great way to get you kind of organized.
Say that again. Sprout
Studio.
For me, it's calendar. 100%. I use Google Calendar, and it tells me the reminders and everything else. And part of it, again, experience, workflow, as I mentioned in the video. When I get home, that's usually when I already know that I'm going to do the upload. I'll try to do the culling. I'll try to do as much as possible while all that information in my head is still fresh. Because I've had it, again, in the past where I've gotten home, put my camera down, I haven't backed up anything, and the next day I feel like I'm behind because I didn't go through my regular workflow of dumping everything, making sure everything is backed up, all that kind of stuff. So for me, the day of photography doesn't end when I get home. I continue the process at home to do that. And there are times where even as I'm going through it, I'm making selections on what I'm going to edit. So I might even start that process. If it's early enough in the day, I'll even start editing the same day. Just because, again, it's fresh in my head.
Awesome. So you just talked about editing. What percentage of the photos that you take are edited and sent over to the client? And how long do you take on average editing each photo? And do you have any presets to speed this process up?
So this is going to be different for both of us. For me, what's the famous answer? It depends.
That is going to be the same.
That's going to be the same.
Yeah.
So it depends. So if it is a model, okay, there's going to be differences here, because if I'm shooting for a model, then they're the highlight of the photo. So I have to make sure that skin, all that stuff looks really, really good because I'm highlighting the model. If it's clothing, then the model's still important, but not as important as highlighting the clothing. So the editing process and the amount of time that it might take, it could vary in that instance. I can say that on average, if I need to do a quick edit, anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes per image is what I can do. If I'm really detailed, then it could be anywhere from an hour and a half. Now, there's been times where I've taken much longer because there's much more to do. There's multiple faces, multiple things in the image. So that's why I can average out to about anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour of doing an edit from beginning to end completed, where I'm doing, in terms of editing, I'll do skin first, color, the brightness, darkness, contrast, all that stuff is Lightroom. And if there needs to be any photoshopping done, as in liquefying the image or doing some drastic changes, getting rid of something in the background or anything like that, where I then utilize layers, that's when it'll be Photoshop. So I try to get as much done in Lightroom as possible, including deleting pimples and things like that. So anything that's kind of skin related, I try to do in Lightroom. And then in Photoshop is where the heavy surgery happens.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not going to repeat what Jad said. I'll just echo basically what he was saying. It really depends on the project. Some things that help speed up that process is that you can apply a custom profile to your images upon importing, so that when you're looking at the images, you're not looking at the raw file, you're looking at how you like the contrast, how you like your colors, and that can be applied across the board, and you can make fine-tuned changes, as you move along that process. And that can then be multiplied in a sense where those presets can be used by AI software such as Aftershoot, where you can apply those and more, where you are getting better and a more accurate exposure, highlight control, that kind of stuff through the AI systems that are available. So oftentimes for weddings, that is one way to get the bulk of images, at least in that 90% ballpark. So let's say I'm working with 800 deliverable images out of 2,000 or 3,000 or however many we shoot on the day. Let's say I deliver 800, they're going to be about 90% because they've already have my input applied to the bulk of them, right? My flavor of colors, my flavor of contrast, blacks, all that kind of stuff. So those are kind of the two ways that you can speed that up. And again, depends on the project. I try not to spend time in Photoshop. I'm not a Photoshop expert. I try to avoid it as much as I can, but there's, if we do commercial shoots and we do products and different things like that, yeah, we're in there. There's no other way to escape that. So it just depends on the project. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think of it also as there's a collaboration, especially when I'm dealing with models. I might do the edit and I'll send it to them, and then they have to approve it. They like it or not. They will give their own notes, and that might add more time. So once I have one image ready, I'll send it to them, and that's kind of maybe the proof for the collection. And then from that point on, I'll know, okay, she wants me to pay attention to her hair, or she wants me to pay attention to this detail of the photograph. So then I can apply that knowledge towards the remaining images that I'm doing. So it's not necessarily back and forth. It's usually that one time that I'll get that feedback, and then I can make any adjustments that needs to be done.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right, one more question for me. So, Raph, you mentioned sending the unedited JPEGs to photo editing companies, and this obviously saves a ton of time, as editing the photos takes tremendously longer than just taking the photos. At what point do you think outsourcing these photo edits becomes worth the investment?
Yeah. So I'll do a quick correction. We sent out the raw files, not the JPEGs,
Right.
because those can be manipulated, a lot further. But yeah, we get JPEGs back, which is great, or we get back a Lightroom XMP file that gets applied to a catalog, which then we can see the results of those edits. Sorry, what's the second part of your question? Can you just quickly repeat that?
Yeah. At what point does the outsourcing become worth your investment?
Sure. Yeah, it depends on how much of you value your time, and you start when you stop what we like to call pixel peeping, where we get so obsessed with our own images to the point where we can go crazy thinking like, oh, this is a little bit too blue, this is a little bit too yellow, and doing that with 1,000 images on a wedding day, it's going to be months before you can get through that job. So at one point you just got to let go, and and it's very I don't know, it's very freeing. You got to calculate what your time is worth, your time away from your family, your time away from your friends, time away from perhaps doing other work or getting other jobs. So I think that's the best time to decide whether outsourcing is something that makes sense, right? Because if you can build that into your price, charge the right amount of money for your service as a photographer, and have that already built in, the outsourcing, I think that's the way to do it. So yeah, just start valuing your time, and yeah, that's what I would suggest.
And the other thing is that, again, when you're outsourcing, it's still your vision.
Yeah.
So Raph still has to tell the outsourcing company, this is what I want it to look like. These are the colors, this is the tone. So all of those notes, Raph gives the company so that they're doing the job that reflects his work.
Yeah, and then we do a quality check, right? Stuff comes back, and I've worked with some companies where we weren't on the same page. I was getting stuff back that I'm like, I would never deliver this to a client. Like, we have to start from scratch, or I have to try a different company. Or, maybe something has changed in my end. And like, you know what? I originally thought that shot could look like this, but now I would kind of want to change it up. I want to make it a little darker. Maybe I want to make it brighter, whatever it is, that the vision that I want. I still have, last minute control there before it goes to the client. But yeah, when you start dealing with, hundreds of images, over and over, especially if you're a busy photographer. Earlier, I mean, now I'm kind of phasing weddings out a little bit slowly. But when I used to shoot 30 weddings a year, let's say, there's only 52 weekends in a year, right? So most of my weekends were gone, and then it's a lot of photos to look at, and I had to let go and just trust that process, and it's definitely been a good decision.
All right. If there are no further questions, I think that about wraps it up. Thank you guys so much for hopping on and doing this. Super impressed that you guys were able to do that entire 2-part webinar in just 2 total cuts, which I don't know how you guys do. You guys are just naturals. But big thanks to you too. Thanks to Marina for modeling, and thank you to Louise for recording the whole thing. You guys have a great night, and we'll
Thanks
see
so
you
much.
next month.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having us.
Take care.